Leo, the black boy, traced the worn-out grooves on his wooden desk, a landscape his fingers knew better than his eyes ever could. In the cacophony of the school common room, he was an island of silence, his world defined by sound, scent, and touch. The laughter of his classmates was a language he understood but could never truly speak. The trap. Leo could only shake his head, his throat too tight to form words. The headmaster was already calling his name, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "Leo Washington, come on up to the stage." He thought of his grandmother's piano, of the melodies that lived inside him. He wasn't singing for them, he was singing for himself. It was a note of impossible purity, a clear, haunting melody that sliced through the tense silence of the hall, replaced by a collective, sharp intake of breath. His voice swelled, filling every corner of the vast hall, a current of raw, untamed emotion that spoke of loneliness, of hope, of a beauty born from darkness. There was no microphone feedback, no cracked notes, no hesitation. People were looking at him differently. The whispers were no longer cruel, but filled with wonder. "I can't believe it," someone said. "Who knew?" A girl with a kind, soft voice stopped him. "My name's Chloe," she said. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." For the first time, Leo felt a flicker of something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. There was only the voice of force of nature that held 1,000 people utterly and completely captive. The room wasn't just quiet, it was speechless. Students who had been slouched in their chairs sat bolt upright. Teachers lowered their coffee cups. Mark, standing in the wings with a smug grin plastered on his face, felt the expression melt into disbelief. This wasn't happening. He felt a tear trace a path down his cheek, a warm line in the cool air. He had faced the lions, and somehow he had tamed them with nothing but a song. As the applause finally began to subside, he felt a gentle hand on his arm. "Leo," Mr. Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. That was astonishing. The joke wasn't landing. The blind kid wasn't failing. He was soaring. It hung in the air for a moment, shimmering and perfect, before it was joined by another and another, weaving a tapestry of sound that was breathtakingly beautiful. He wasn't singing a pop song or anything they knew. It was a soulful, melancholic ballad that felt ancient and raw. He lifted his head, facing the unseen crowd, and opened his mouth. The first note wasn't for them. It was for the part of him they could never touch. Every sound was magnified, the shuffling of feet, the stifled giggles, the squeak of the microphone being adjusted. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds, a vacuum of disbelief. Then, a single person started clapping. It was Mr. Harrison, his face a mask of wonder. Then another person joined, and another, until the entire hall erupted into a thunderous, roaring ovation that shook the very floorboards. It felt like walking the plank, and the sharks were circling. He could hear Mark and his friends snickering a few rows behind him. He could feel the heat of the stage lights on his face, a poor substitute for the sun, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He thought about refusing, about turning and walking away. But where would he go? Back to his seat? To the sound of their triumphant laughter? Back to being the victim? No. A strange calm began to settle over him, a quiet defiance that came from having nothing left to lose. They wanted a show. He would give them one. A hand, Mark's hand, roughly guided him to the microphone stand. "Break a leg, mate," Mark whispered, the venom in his voice so thick Leo could almost taste it. The hall fell into a hushed, expectant silence, pregnant with mockery. The plan was obvious: to thrust him onto the stage, the awkward blind boy, expecting him to fail spectacularly. They wanted to see him stammer, to hear his voice crack, to watch him squirm under the weight of 1,000 stares he could only feel. It was the ultimate prank, a public humiliation designed to shatter what little confidence he had. He heard the sharp, arrogant tone of Mark, the unofficial king of their year, followed by the braying laughter of his friends. They were the soundtrack to Leo's daily anxiety, a constant reminder of his otherness in a world built for the sighted. His only escape was music. At home, his fingers would find the cool ivory of his grandmother's old piano, and the world would melt away. School was a minefield of carelessly placed bags, sudden shouts, and the piercing cruelty of teenagers. The headmaster, a man whose voice was as dry as old paper, was droning on about the upcoming end-of-term celebrations. And to conclude our assembly, he declared, we have a surprise performance. Mark Jennings has informed me that a fellow student, Leo Washington, has volunteered to sing for us all. A wave of murmurs rippled through the hall. Leo felt his blood run cold. Volunteered? He hadn't spoken to Mark in months, except to be tripped by him. That day the air felt different, charged with a malicious energy directed squarely at him. He could feel their stares, even if he couldn't see them. Mark was planning something. The scent of his cheap cologne seemed to get closer, and the whispers had a new, sharper edge. Leo's hands clenched into fists under the desk, his knuckles white, bracing for an impact he knew was coming. In those moments, he wasn't the blind boy, the easy target, the charity case. He was a creator of worlds, painting landscapes of sound and emotion that were more vivid than anything he was told he was missing. His voice, a secret he kept locked away, was his most private treasure. It was the one part of him that felt whole, powerful, and free from the shadows that defined his life. But school was not home. The announcement came during the morning assembly. This was it. His teacher, Mr. Harrison, leaned over, his voice a low whisper of concern. Leo, did you agree to this? Every step towards the stage was a battle. His cane tapped nervously on the floor, a fragile metronome counting down to his social execution. Leo stood there, alone in the spotlight. He took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs, quieting the tremor in his hands. The note that left Leo's lips was not the cracked, timid sound the crowd had been expecting. The snickering died instantly. Leo closed his unseen eyes, lost in the world he was creating. When the last note faded into the rafters, the silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of mockery. Leo stood, trembling, as the wave of sound washed over him. It wasn't laughter. It was applause. It was for him. As he was guided off the stage, the atmosphere had completely changed. When the last note faded into the rafters, the silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of mockery, but of profound, stunned. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds, a vacuum of disbelief. Then, a single person started clapping. He felt a tear trace a path down his cheek, a warm line in the cool air. He had faced the lions, and somehow he had tamed them with nothing but a song. As the applause finally began to subside, he felt a gentle hand on his arm. Leo, Mr. Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. That was astonishing. It was Mr. Harrison, his face a mask of wonder. Then another person joined, and another, until the entire hall erupted into a thunderous. The music that flowed from them was lighter, less freighted with sorrow, describing the world to him in ways that made it feel less alien. She'd read him passages from books, her voice painting pictures in his mind. Younger students would point him out, and even some of the older, tougher kids would give him a nod of respect. He was no longer just the blind boy. He was the guy who can sing. It was a simple change, but it was everything. It was impossible to disprove. But Leo could hear the satisfaction in his voice as he talked to his friends, loud enough for Leo to overhear. I'm just saying, it's a bit of a miracle, isn't it? One day he's a nobody. The next he's a singing sensation who just happens to be blind. Great story. Who's poisoning the well? Leo would sit at the grand piano, but the music wouldn't come. His voice felt trapped in his throat, choked by the poison that had seeped into his life. Every note he tried to sing felt fraudulent, as if he were trying to prove the rumor wrong with every melody. The joy was gone, replaced by a desperate need for validation, turning Leo's greatest vulnerability into a weapon against him. He had used whispers and doubts to achieve what his fists never could. Don't let him do this to you, Leo, she pleaded, her voice full of frustration. He's a pathetic, jealous coward. Can't let him win. Leo just shook his head, the feeling of hopelessness, a heavy cloak around his shoulders. How do I fight it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. He's made them believe that the one true thing about me is a lie. He had isolated Leo again, turning his gift into the very source of his misery. The applause was a distant memory, drowned out by the constant nagging question in the air. Is he faking it? How do you prove you can't see two people who are determined to doubt you? The path that had once cleared for him now seemed to close in, people accidentally bumping into him more often. Doubt is a weed that once planted is nearly impossible to root out. Leo felt himself withdrawing again, The walls he had started to lower being rebuilt brick by painful brick. The joy he had felt was being systematically dismantled, leaving him feeling more exposed and alone than ever before. Someone even tested him by leaving a bag directly in his path, laughing when he inevitably stumbled over it. He found himself trying to act more blind, fumbling more than usual, just to prove a point to an audience he couldn't see. The lie was forcing him to perform his disability, turning his everyday reality into a stage show for skeptics. Mark hadn't just attacked his reputation, he had attacked his identity. The magic of his performance was curdling into resentment. The rumor preyed on the natural envy and suspicion of his peers. The same people who had applauded him now looked at him with a flicker of doubt in their eyes. His talent was real, they reasoned, but what if the story behind it was a lie? The label was no longer about his deficiency, but about his gift. And for the first time, he had someone to share his lunch with who didn't see him as a project or a problem. Mr. Harrison also took him under his wing, offering him the key to the music room so he could practice on the school's grand piano whenever he wanted. The applause still echoed in his ears, a warm and welcome ghost. But beneath the warmth, a seed of anxiety remained. He had shown them his soul, and they had applauded. But in doing so, he had also shown his enemies exactly what he valued most. Leo would catch snippets of their conversations, hushed and angry. They were biding their time, looking for a weakness, a crack in his newfound armor. The applause had protected him, but applause fades. Mark's hatred, Leo suspected, was far more permanent. He was waiting for the school to forget, for the novelty to wear off, before he struck again. He had given them a new target. Roaring ovation that shook the very floorboards. For once, the whispers that followed him down the corridors were not of pity or scorn, but of amazement. People made way for him, their usual carelessness replaced by a newfound respect. It was disorienting, like the entire social landscape of the school had been redrawn in the space of a single 3-minute song. It started as a whisper, a venomous little seed planted in the fertile ground of teenage gossip. "Have you ever actually seen a doctor's note?" a voice would say in the canteen. "It's a bit convenient, isn't it? The way he gets out of sports and gets extra time on exams." The rumor was as clever as it was cruel. That Leo wasn't completely blind. He was faking it, or at least exaggerating it for sympathy and special treatment. Leo stood, trembling, as the wave of sound washed over him. It wasn't laughter, it was applause. It was for him. As he was guided off the stage, the atmosphere had completely changed. People were looking at him differently. The whispers were no longer cruel, but filled with wonder. "I can't believe it," someone said. Who knew? Leo could sense their fury, a cold, sharp presence in the rooms they shared. He had not only failed to be humiliated, he had turned their prank into his triumph. He had stolen their power, their audience, and their control over the school's narrative. Their silence was not an admission of defeat. It was the quiet before a storm. We knew they wouldn't let this go. They couldn't. A girl with a kind, soft voice stopped him. "My name's Chloe," she said. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. For the first time, Leo felt a flicker of something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. The rest of the day was a blur. School was buzzing with his name. Mark and his crew were conspicuously silent. That evening, sitting at his piano, Leo's fingers felt different on the keys. The next few weeks were a strange new chapter in Leo's life. Chloe became a constant, friendly presence. His performance became the stuff of school legend. Yet the shadow of Mark lingered. The attack, when it came, was far more insidious than a trip in the hallway. The lie spread like a virus. Mark was the architect of it all, orchestrating the campaign from the shadows. He never said anything to Leo's face. The shift in the school's atmosphere was palpable. The respectful nods were replaced by suspicious glances. Chloe and Mr. Harrison were furious, defending him fiercely. But the rumor had a life of its own. The worst part was the insidious nature of the lie. It made him question himself. The music room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. He knew Mark had won this round. The bully hadn't needed to throw a punch. One afternoon, Chloe found him sitting in silence in the music room, his hands resting limply on the keys. The pressure began to mount in ways Leo hadn't anticipated. A teacher, not Mr. Harrison, suggested it might be helpful for everyone, If his parents provided an updated assessment from a specialist, he had to prove himself. Tired of advocating, tired of the constant need to justify their son's existence. "We'll call the doctor, sweetie," his father said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. But Leo knew it wasn't about a doctor's note. "This is it, Leo," she said, her eyes, which he imagined as bright and fierce, fixed on him. Liam, one of Mark's closest friends, had always been on the periphery of the bullying. He laughed at the jokes, but his laughter was always a beat behind, a little too forced. Chloe had noticed it. She approached him one day after school, not with accusations, but with a simple question. "Does it feel good?" she asked. "What you're doing to him?" There it was, the truth, in the bully's own words. They could take it to the headmaster, and Mark would likely be suspended, but that felt too small, too private. It felt like the entire school had turned out, not just for the show, but for the drama. They wanted to see what would happen when Leo took the stage. Would he be brilliant again? Or would he falter under the weight of their suspicion? Leo could feel their collective gaze, a heavy, judgmental weight. The humiliation had been public. The vindication needed to be public, too. The talent show was in 2 days, and the stage was already set. Chloe's earlier words echoed in his mind. You have to take back the story. The same spot where his life had changed twice already. Stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build to an almost unbearable peak. He could feel Mark's presence in the front row, radiating smug confidence, the malice. The calculation, the complete lack of remorse. It was the weapon they needed, the one thing that could cut through the fog of rumor and lies. It wasn't Leo's word against Mark's anymore. It was Mark's word against Mark. This is your chance to answer them without saying a word. But you can't just sing, you have to do something more. You have to take back the story. He didn't understand what she meant, but she had a look in her eyes, or a tone in her voice. Whatever happens, Leo, we're proud of you. Chloe was busy, talking quietly with the tech crew, a small audio device clutched in her hand. The plan was risky, it could backfire spectacularly, but it was the only way. He corrected himself that told him a plan was forming. It was about the fact that even with a mountain of proof, people would only believe what they wanted to believe. He had to submit his life, his condition. "I'm not doing anything," he mumbled. "It's just a laugh." "Is it?" Chloe pressed. He was wrestling with himself, torn between loyalty to his friends and a burgeoning conscience. "Mark's a nightmare," he admitted, his voice low. "He's obsessed with this. He brags about it all the time, about how he turned everyone against Leo with just a few words. And then he offered the key. He recorded himself the other day, talking about it, sent it to a few of us to show how clever he was. My little brother has cerebral palsy. People laugh at him all the time. It doesn't look like laughing to me." It was perfect. His voice crackled from Chloe's phone speaker. "You can't punch a blind kid. You'll get expelled. But you can make everyone think he's a liar. You destroy him from the inside. He's probably sitting in a dark room right now, crying his eyes out. Pathetic. It looks like cruelty." She had struck a nerve. Liam's face paled, and he looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Mr. Harrison immediately put Leo's name forward, seeing it as the perfect opportunity for him to silence the doubters once and for all. "Let them hear you again, Leo," he urged. "Music is your truth. Let it speak for you." His very reality for inspection because a bully was bored. The injustice of it was a physical weight. The stage that had been the site of his greatest triumph now seemed like a gallows. What if his voice cracked this time? What if they didn't applaud? Whispers had grown louder, more confident. Imagine standing there singing his heart out, only to be met with cold stares and accusations. The thought of it made his stomach churn. He was the victim, yet he was the one being placed under scrutiny. The world he had tried so hard to navigate felt like it was tilting, its rules rewriting themselves to favor the cruel and punish the vulnerable, just to clear the air. The request was polite, couched in the language of concern. But the implication was clear. The school administration was beginning to buckle under the weight of the gossip. Rumor was no longer just a schoolyard taunt. It was becoming an official inquiry. Leo felt a surge of rage, cold and sharp. He told his parents, and the weariness in his mother's sigh was more painful than any insult. They were tired of fighting. A new talent show was announced for the end of the year, a much bigger event this time, with judges from outside the school. But Leo was terrified. Chloe, however, saw it differently. The plan began with an unlikely source. Liam flinched, looking around to see if anyone was watching. That evening, Liam found Chloe. The recording was everything. It was a 5-minute audio file of Mark, his voice dripping with arrogance, boasting to his friends about his master plan. Listening to it made Leo feel sick, but it was also profoundly validating. Now, the question was how to use it. The night of the talent show, the air in the school hall was thick with tension. Backstage, his hands were ice-cold. Mr. Harrison gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. When his name was called, a strange mix of applause and hushed, negative whispers followed him to the stage. He found his way to the microphone. Leo took a breath, but he didn't sing. Instead, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm, carrying to every corner of the hall. "Before I sing," he began, "I know there have been some rumors going around about me, about my eyes, about whether or not I am telling the truth." A shocked murmur went through the crowd. No one expected him to address it directly. "I've learned that you can and prove what's in your heart to people who do and want to see it. My blindness is not a story. It's not a strategy. It's just a part of who I am." People were on their feet, not just for the voice, but for the boy. For his courage, for his strength. He became a pariah overnight. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding respect. People didn't just see Leo's talent anymore. They saw his character. They had witnessed him face down his tormentor with grace and courage, and it was a lesson no one would soon forget. He had taught them something about truth, and about the quiet strength it takes to hold on to it in a world of lies. To the feeling of terror and the smug look he had sensed on Mark's face, he took their cruelest joke and turned it into his defining anthem. Face down hatred, not with more hatred, but with unshakable truth and the raw power of his gift. He found his voice in the silence, and in doing so, he taught an entire school how to listen. It was a memory, but it no longer had power over him. It was just the first chapter in a much longer story, a story he was still writing. He had learned that the world's perception of you is a prison, only if you give it the key. His key was his music, and it had set him free. His friends deserted him, ashamed to be associated with him. He was suspended, but that was the least of his punishments. The most beautiful music often comes from the most unlikely of places. If you were moved by Leo's incredible journey of resilience and hope, and want to hear more stories that inspire and uplift, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our community. You won't want to miss what's next. He and other musically inclined students formed a small club, mentored by Mr. Harrison. They wrote songs, they practiced. They shared their passion away from the pressure of performance. Leo's voice, once his most private secret, became a source of connection and community. The public disgrace, the knowledge that everyone knew the petty darkness in his heart, was a far greater sentence. He had tried to destroy Leo from the inside, and in the end, he had only succeeded in destroying himself. As Leo stood there, taking it all in, he felt a profound sense of peace. He hadn't just won, he had reclaimed himself. My voice is also a part of who I am. That was never the point. The victory wasn't about becoming a star. It was about earning the right to be himself. The world hadn't magically become easier to navigate. There were still carelessly placed obstacles, still moments of frustration, but something fundamental had shifted inside him. He no longer saw his blindness as a weakness that needed to be hidden or defended. It was simply a fact of his life, no more or less important than the color of his hair or the sound of his incredible voice. He was whole. To walk the halls of his own school without fear or shame. His friendship with Chloe deepened, built on a foundation of trust and shared battle. Liam, racked with guilt, apologized to him, and Leo, understanding the courage it took, accepted. Had found his people. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Tonight, I'm not singing to prove anything. I'm singing because it's what I love." He continued, his voice gaining strength. The song that poured out of him was not one of anger or revenge. It was a song of resilience, of release, of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the sound of a spirit unburdened, of a voice set free from the cage of other people's hatred. It was more powerful, more beautiful, and more profound than his first performance. It was the sound of victory. It was perfect. You can't punch a blind kid. You destroy him from the inside. Gasps rippled through the audience. Every head turned towards the front row where Mark was sitting. His face went from smug to confused to utterly horrified, as his own words condemned him in front of the entire school. The recording played on, each word a nail in his social coffin. So instead, I'd like to share the words of the person who started these rumors. He nodded slightly towards the tech booth. Every student and teacher in that hall had been played, and the puppet master was sitting right there in the front row, his face ashen. Mark looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape, but he was trapped by 1,000 pairs of eyes. Chloe hit play. Suddenly, Mark's voice, arrogant and cruel, filled the hall. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. It was the silence of shock, of shame, of dawning realization. Then Leo spoke again, and then he sang. The applause that followed was deafening. It was a roar of apology, of support, of admiration. The fallout for Mark was immediate and absolute. In the days that followed, the school felt different again. Leo never sought fame or a record deal, continued to use the music room, but now it was a place of joy, not escape. Still faced challenges. Years later, Leo would sometimes think back to that first assembly. His journey was a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the absence of vulnerability, but what you do with it. Leo's story is a powerful reminder that you should never judge a person by the challenges they face, but by the courage with which they face them.